Hello, everyone. I'm Madhav Rajan. I'm the Dean and the George Schultz Professor of Accounting at Chicago Booth. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Pleased that you could be here as we welcome Booth alum Brian Niccol of Chipotle to be our first Distinguished Speaker Series of 2022. This series event, of course, is a long-standing Chicago Booth tradition. We bring in high-profile leaders from business, from the government, from the community, to come to the school, share their insights and experience with all of you. So we moved to a virtual DSS series back in April of 2020 at the start of the pandemic, and it was really well received by our students and alumni across the globe. So we had conversations with people like Kurt Del Bene from Microsoft, Tom Ricketts of the Cubs, Jenny Scanlon from UL, and many others, learning about how these executives and their companies responded to COVID-19. And the format proved so popular that we continued that through last academic year. We had Dave McLennan from Cargill, JP Gan from Inns Capital in Shanghai, and Mukherjee from Pernod Ricard, and many others. And this academic year, we've been off to a great start. We hosted Eric Gleacher, Dan Caruso, Russ Hutchinson from Goldman, and Jose Antonio Alvarez, the chairman of Santander. We're really thrilled to have today's distinguished speaker with us. Brian Niccol is chairman of the board and CEO of Chipotle Mexican Grill. He assumed the role of chairman in March 2020, and under his leadership as CEO, which he's been since March 2018, Chipotle has seen an amazing turnaround and incredible growth. And so driving the brand's purpose to cultivate a better world, Brian has focused on increasing visibility, expanding access, fostering innovation, and encouraging engagement with employees and consumers. So prior to joining Chipotle, Brian served as CEO of Taco Bell, where he was Chief Marketing and Innovation Officer and President. And he also had many executive positions at Pizza Hut, which is another division of Yum Brands, including GM and CMO. And prior to that, he spent 10 years at Procter & Gamble in various brand management positions. So, of course, everybody knows Chipotle. In the last couple of years, they've been in just about every list you can see, the Forbes list of most admired companies, best employer for diversity, Newsweek list of most responsible companies. And Brian himself was Fortune's 2019 Business Person of the Year. He was the Restaurant Business Magazine's 2020 Leader of the Year, among many other accolades. And he was the winner of Chicago Booth's Distinguished Alumnus Award in the Young Alum category in 2020. So Brian is a former Kilts Center Steering Committee member and a Kilts Center Marketing Fellowship mentor as well. And in fact, he spoke at Booth's Road to Recovery event about consumers' response to COVID-19. So it's an incredible pleasure to be able to welcome Brian. Thank you so much, Brian, for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we have a bunch of questions that the audience sent in advance, which I'll sort of talk about. I want to tell the audience also to please send in questions through the Q&A, and I will intersperse them with the ones that I have. So would love for this to be as interactive as possible. So Brian, maybe just start with what inspired or convinced you to join Chipotle in 2018 and take on the role of CEO?
Yeah, so look, I was a customer of the company, and way back when they first opened their first restaurant in Cincinnati, Ohio, with Procter & Gamble at the time. And that was my first experience with Chipotle. And, I loved it then, and I continued to love the brand. And obviously I'd seen just the tremendous success that they had in the early days. And then they ran into some issues, which presented the opportunity for me to come into the company. So, I thought of the Chipotle brand as a brand that had, just tremendous quality, tremendous value proposition. And then I really bought into the food purpose they had around food with integrity. And frankly, at my prior company before here, I was trying to figure out how I could continue to evolve that supply chain and that business to be hopefully, providing more nutritious food done the right way. And to have the opportunity to lead a company that was kind of at the forefront of that really excited me. And then, I felt like a lot of the challenges that the company was facing were things that if we got back to the core business of doing things correctly, we could solve those problems. But, you can't recreate whether or not the brand's got a great purpose, whether or not the culinary's got delicious food. And, we had both of those things, and we had actually a really big employee base that was passionate about doing the right thing. So, all those things said to me, boy, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And if I was given the opportunity, I would jump at it.
So one of the questions that came in was, what does a typical day in the life look for you? Like, how much are you in? I take it you're in Newport Beach or right now? How much are you
I am,
there?
yes, yeah.
And how much are
I am
you
today.
On the road, pre-COVID and post-COVID?
Well, look, obviously pre-COVID, we were able to get around the country a lot easier. Now where we are in the phase of COVID, I'm able to get back to our restaurants with some pretty regular visits. I'm usually out every week, and also connecting with our suppliers. Between the challenges of labor and also a lot of the challenges with supply chain, it's been really important to be, I think, out there with the relationships both in our restaurants and with our suppliers. So that's where I'm spending a lot of my time, obviously. And fortunately for us, we've got roughly about 100,000 employees that just are doing a fabulous job. They never stopped going into the restaurant. I like to remind people this all the time, right? We switched to remote work, and then we debate the merits of hybrid work and how many days a week. And I remind everybody around here, I was like, you do realize, like, where we actually make money, they've always been going into the office every day, 7 days a week. They've not skipped a beat. And so, I think it's really important for me to be able to get out there and be with the folks that actually provide the experience of our brand to our customers. And then on the supply side of things, I really have to hand it to our supply chain leaders. They've done a phenomenal job. We really have not, we've had some spot outages, but we've not had any major outages. So, we've been able to give people the chicken, the rice, the guacamole that they want. And, that wasn't easy. There were a couple long days and long nights where we're like, I don't know how this is going to work, but we threaded the needle. So, and we're still working aggressively in that space.
So maybe I'll follow up with a couple of questions on that. Some of your competitors have been, curtailing their hours, closing some stores because they're unable to sort of get people to come in, or they're unable to get their logistics to work. Sort of what have you been doing to be as successful as you've been relative to that?
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. Look, one of the things that was a hidden gem in the company when I first joined Chipotle were the fact that we had all these second make lines. So, we think of the front line as the primary line. And back in 2018, we had these second make lines. And this was an insight from an operator, early days of the company. When they would get large orders, it would screw up the production on the front line. So they started putting in these secondary lines, and, it was for large orders, fax orders, catering orders is the way to think about it. And when I joined the company, we realized, like, oh, wow, we have a real opportunity to take all of our digital business, put it on that second line. It doesn't interact with our front line. And then we figured out an area for people to pick up their food when they ordered digitally. And now we don't call it the second make line, we call it our digital make line. And the reason why we don't call it the second make line anymore, and we call it digital make line, is because it's half the business. So, we now have one kitchen servicing two lines of business, which are just two different access modes. And the reason why I'm giving you this background to answer your question, we've been able now to have a multi-billion-dollar business digitally. We have a multi-billion-dollar business coming through the front line. And if we get into challenges, what we can do is we can control how many orders we take per 15 minutes or per 10 minutes on that digital line, and it creates a little bit of a governor on the business. But I would rather put a governor on the business so that our employees can give our customers great experiences. What happens there is then if you don't get your time slot, say you wanted a 1 o'clock lunch or a 12 o'clock lunch and nothing's available till 1:30 or 2, what we found is people are willing to still come into the restaurant. And so by being able to kind of toggle between the digital make line, the front line, and then frankly, just changing how much output we want to provide per 10 minutes, we've been able to balance when we have COVID exclusions or, whatever it may be, where we need to figure out how to kind of pull back on the business a little bit so that we can continue to give people great experiences. So, that's been a huge advantage for us. the other thing I'll tell you that's a huge advantage is we put into place kind of a new expectation on our food safety culture when I started here. And so one of the primary rules of the road was nobody works if they're not healthy. And we did before COVID, okay, we were doing wellness checks. So before you could clock in or start your shift, and frankly, when I go visit a restaurant, before I'm able to go into the back of the restaurant, the manager asks me our wellness check. And if you don't answer, yes, I'm feeling totally healthy and I've got no symptoms, I haven't been around anybody that's sick, you're not getting into the back of the restaurant. So we already had that as a practice, okay? And we already had as a practice all the hand washing, and we already had the air filtration systems in place. Frankly, the only new thing we had to adopt for COVID in the early days was masks and the 6 feet of distance. But we had all the processes already in place where we were already paying our employees for sick leave. You know, it was already, these things were already in place, and it was zero tolerance to work if you're sick. You know, if there aren't many ways to find yourself having to be asked to leave Chipotle, but one of the ways we would ask you to leave Chipotle, no longer be part of the team, is if you violate this principle of working healthy. And so we already had that in place before all this happened, which really benefited us for our workforce because they felt confident that we were only going to work around each other if we were healthy. Now that doesn't put aside, there was a lot of anxiety about what COVID was and is and so on and so forth, but it helped dramatically. So you combine the health and well-being practices with our ability to toggle between a digital business and a frontline business. And that's afforded us the opportunity to keep our restaurants fairly well running through a lot of ups and downs.
So one question that came up earlier, which sort of a bigger picture question, said, I wouldn't normally think of the CEO of a restaurant chain as being tech savvy, but clearly you've made the digital experience the centerpiece of your strategy over the past 4 years. So how did you know 4 years ago that that's the digital platform is something you really wanted to sort of, focus on? And what were the challenges in introducing online ordering, delivery, rewards, the whole program?
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure who asked the question, but it's true. The restaurant industry has been a laggard in adopting technology. And, I think one of the biggest reasons why is predominantly the model in the restaurant industry is a franchise model. Okay, so I'm assuming people are familiar with this, the franchisor, franchisee. Really, the franchisor is an advertising agency, has the brand, right? Provides the supply chain. But at the end of the day, the franchisee is responsible for the people, the operations, really the capital in the business. And that's a key piece of the puzzle, because if you're going to invest in technology, that's a capital investment. And sometimes those things create friction because what's going to be the return on the technology over what time period? Okay. So that's why I think people see the restaurant industry usually as a laggard. Now, COVID, I think, changed a lot of that because everybody's like, oh, geez, we have to make this leap. Okay. There's no arguing. You can't debate. It's here. Now, go back to when I first came to the company. Look, we have a very young brand of loyal customers. Think of them as the, 18 to 30-year-old crowd. I did an analysis. I'm like, look, what are the big dissatisfiers with Chipotle? And one of the big dissatisfactions with Chipotle was lack of access, and then more specifically, digital access. And so we knew there was a want. And I also just fundamentally believe in reducing friction, without compromising quality is a winning recipe. And no pun intended. And so when I found that we already had the capability of a second line, and, I knew our user was a young user that would quickly adopt a digital platform. One of the things that was great is we own all the restaurants. We have no debt. We have plenty of capital, and we made it a priority. And, look, knock on wood, we were lucky because our timing on that strategy played out really well for us. We put in the last digital make line. It was like December of 19. We removed the last fax machine in January of 2020. And March of 2020 is COVID. And we went from a $800 million business to now a $3 billion digital business. And, along the way, I hired experts too. I've got a great person that leads our social media or digital engagement work, Kurt, who runs our technology group. I think he's the best in the business, and not surprising, the best attract really great people. And as a result, I think they've done just a phenomenal job of figuring out how we continue to improve in the space. And it's really a simple equation, though. We want to reduce friction without compromising any quality.
Mhm. So we have a bunch of questions that have come in. Let me start with the first one about supply chain. So the question is, Brian, when you talk about supply chain, isn't it several supply chains? So the food inputs, first of all, are you looking for more local vendors? And if so, are there multiple ones? And how do you try to sort of coordinate that?
Yeah, so obviously we try to do as much local produce as we can. And then that's seasonal, obviously, right? But, and I think where you're going with this was, hey, you have like a hard goods supply chain, you have our, call it our produce and meats supply chain. And then you have all your packaging from a supply chain standpoint. And yeah, that's true. And they are all very different. The supply chain to build a restaurant is very different from the supply chain to run the restaurant. But, we've had challenges, frankly, across all of it. We're pretty fortunate that so much of our supply chain, though, is domestic when it comes to our food, which really put us in a unique position because, we weren't having to figure out how to get a lot of our items from other parts of the world that were really backed up. And even in the places where we had some things coming in, our supply chain did a great job on like items that we knew, we could get caught short on, but don't expire. We went ahead and forward bought. So like bowls, right? We just went ahead and bought a year's worth of bowls, and we stored them. And it was simple things like that, chairs for new restaurants that we're going to build, go ahead and order. We know we're going to build 200 plus restaurants, get them now. We would have preferred in the old day to get them just in time when we needed them, but you'll take having them over just in time. And the guys did a fabulous job of balancing that.
That's great. Labor shortages, which many of your competitors are dealing with, of course. Question is there like a longer run plan to think about sort of automation, for example? How do you think about your labor force sort of, going forward?
Yes, look, labor has been challenging, no doubt about it. And look, it was challenging before COVID. It just became even more challenging during COVID. And I guess we're hopefully turning the corner here. It's going to continue to be a challenge. And, look, the answer is we're trying to figure out what are parts of the business that we can use automation, technology to frankly improve the job. A lot of the things that we can automate are the parts of the business that people don't like doing. And it causes them to join the company. They do it for like a week or two and they're like, you know what? I don't want to wash any dishes anymore. I'm out of here. I don't want to cut and core avocados. I'm out of here. So we are trying to find places in the business that frankly dissatisfy the employee. They're important tasks that have to be done every day, multiple times a day. And so, we're looking to automation to figure out how we can do that. And the way, the cost of labor has changed and the cost of technology has come down, these things now are starting to look really attractive, where before you would have said, I don't know if it's worth trying to figure out how to automate, dishwashing. Okay. But now it's clear people, even if, well, here's what's crazy. You can pay $15, $20 an hour. They don't want to do the job. It's not even about the wage as much as that's not a job I want to do.
Yeah. So one of the questions was, have wages had to increase? And I think we know the answer to that.
Yeah, they have.
So the question is
they have, and they will continue to go up.
Yeah. And that was the question. You think this inflation is sort of longer term or a transitory? Okay.
Yeah, no, I think transitory, we might want to think about removing it from the dictionary so we don't have to keep hearing people talk about it, because I think everything's real, especially on the wage side of things.
A related question is, do you think a federal minimum wage is inevitable, or sort of what do you think the prospects of that are? And if that happens, how does that affect the fast casual restaurants and how you respond to that?
Yeah, look, I think in our case, our wage is already on average above $15. I think it's going to continue to go up. We've never paid minimum wage. So you'll hear a lot of people say minimum wage, whatever it may be, a federal minimum wage could really impact their business in a negative way, or, potentially result in them raising prices. Okay. And the answer is, look, wage, if there becomes a new federal minimum wage, we'll reset the business to figure out how you operate accordingly. We'll look for efficiency. We'll look for, pricing. We'll look for inefficiencies to get out. So, I don't think it's all that effective to put in a federal minimum wage. However, I don't get to make the policy. So if it does happen, our company's well positioned to handle it. And, we'll continue to be a leader in wages and opportunity. And look, I think that's the biggest thing that separates our company from others is, yeah, we give a great starting wage. But what I hear from people that are new to our company, why they're excited to be at our restaurant company, is because they know we're going to build 200, 300 restaurants a year. And in a year or two, they could be running a $2-3 million restaurant. And in 3 to 5 years, they could be running 7 or 8 of them, making 6 figures and potentially, going even well beyond that, So our growth company is a unique proposition in the restaurant industry because so much of the restaurant industry is either franchisee or, a small regional proposition where you don't have the same type of growth opportunity that we have here. So the combination of a good wage and good growth opportunities, that's how we're able to retain people.
So a question about the other level, which is, are you seeing at your executive level sort of people, the sort of big turnover, or have you not seen the sort of great resignation affect you at that level?
No, we just haven't. We've got a great team, and fortunately this team wants to stay together to what we think is going to really make a positive impact on the food that people have access to. So we're pretty passionate about it, and I'm pretty fortunate to have a great team that wants to go all in on this.
So we have a couple of questions about sort of the delivery model. One question is, let me get to here. Yeah, have you looked into stores that only take online orders, and as opposed to sort of what you're doing currently?
Yeah, we have. We've just started a couple tests. So we've got one restaurant that purely does digital orders for pickup and catering. We've just opened one restaurant that is doing now our Chipotle as well as digital orders. And the Chipotle, for everybody who may not know what it is, that's where you order ahead and you're able to pick it up without having to get out of your car. There's a pickup window. And we're early days in those. It's more of a infill or a seam restaurant is what we would call strategy, because we only have 3,000 restaurants. We think we could have 6,000 plus restaurants. I still want to build the full Chipotle that gives you all access points, right? And we just talked about the digital business. It's 42-43% of our business. Not inconsequential, but why wouldn't I open up something that has access to 100% of my business? So, and we still have tons of opportunity to do that. Now, with that said, there are some markets where we're more penetrated than others. And what's exciting about this is it does provide us the ability to maybe add a restaurant where before we didn't think we could go into that trade area. And so that's what we're testing.
What is your go-to Chipotle order?
Well, I go, right now my go-to order is I do white rice, the fajita veggies, half chicken, half the plant-based chorizo, and the pico de gallo. And then I get the hot salsa on the side. So my son throws all the hot salsa on it. I got to put it on the side.
There's a question about when you took over and some of the issues that Chipotle was going through before you took over. Question is, what was the bigger challenge, the actual operational fixes that you had to do, or the sort of the PR issues that you had to deal with?
Look, they go hand in hand, right? If you aren't, walking the talk on what you're promising to the customer, you're not going, to win. And so, Scott Boatwright, who leads our operations, he's done a phenomenal job. And what we had to do was get back to establishing what is the standard and ensuring that standard was executed every shift, every day, every restaurant. And, if Scott were here, he tells a great story. We were visiting some restaurants. This is early days. And we go in and we'd ask people, hey, let's show us how you make the guacamole. And they would go, well, this is how I do it. And that's, it's great that they were passionate about it, but that wasn't the answer we were looking for. What we were looking for was, well, this is the way you do it at Chipotle. And, we had those types of opportunities everywhere. And one of the things we saw really quickly in probably the first 6 to 9 months was just people saying, hey, the food tastes like it used to. You know, it's not dull. It's got the flavor. It's got the deliciousness. It's got the, you know, the Chipotle craveability that I'm after. And, you know, we had a scenario where we had some managers that thought it was too spicy. So they were like, well, you know, I'll make the chicken a little less spicy. And it's like, no, you know, that's not how we do it. And so that was a reset for us. And the reason why that was important is because, you know, people expect consistency. I mean, one of the things that's great about a chain with our scale is, you know, whether you're in Chicago, whether you're here in Newport Beach, my hope is you feel like you're getting the same Chipotle experience regardless of where you are. And that took some work. And, you know, Lori, who I think you met earlier, I remember when I first asked her, I'm like, you know, what are the positive stories being written about Chipotle? I mean, everybody's showing me all the negative stories. What are some of the positive stories? And then it realized to me, I was like, well, to get positive stories, you got to get positive results. And so, you know, the way you get there is, hey, make the chicken right, make the guacamole right, you know, and when people show up, be on time, be fast, you know, and so we got good at the basics again. We have a saying around here, like, be brilliant at the basics. You know, I was trying to make it sound more exciting because it's so important. And, you know, I also didn't want us to think like the digital opportunity was going to, you know, dig us out of the hole, because at the end of the day, the digital is just an access mode. It's not replacing culinary. If we can't do great culinary, we won't be a great restaurant company.
Great answer. How do you think about the competitive position of smaller players in fast casual, or just more broadly, who do you think of as your competition, and sort of who do you see coming up?
Yeah, look, you know, one of the things we're pretty fortunate about is we're in a category that's growing big time. And we're one of the biggest players in a growing category. And, you know, there are some regional folks that I think are doing a great job, but I really don't see us competing directly with them. And, you know, it's such a huge market when you think about casual dining, QSR, and even fine dining for that matter. It is so many eating occasions. To be in a growing category and doing the food the way people want to eat, and then and how they want to get access to it, it's just a huge advantage. And with our scale, we have some supply chain advantages. You know, we're able to buy better than a lot of the smaller folks are. And so, you know, people always ask me, they're like, geez, how can that chicken burrito at Chipotle still be less than $8? You know, when they go to some other place that has arguably the same caliber of food, you know, they're paying $15 for a sandwich or a salad. And, you know, so when you look at it that way, you know, some people would tell me, well, why don't you raise your prices? And my response is, well, I like to know that I could if I had to, you know, and I love having this value advantage, which is a huge advantage. And as evidence right now, we're probably going to need to lean on some of our pricing power with the inflation that we're facing.
So we have a sort of very interesting marketing type question, sort of leading into some of your product innovation stuff, Brian. So straight marketing question, how do you measure the success of your Chipotle rewards program? Are you seeing like a measurable difference between sort of how the reward members and non-members spend?
Yeah, look, it's really simple. It's frequency and spend. You know, and what we see is those that are in a rewards program do more of both. And we can also see how we can influence behaviors by then communicating with them, you know, on what we call a personalization journey. So it is, how do we become more relevant, more engaging? Because what we see is that turns into more purchases and a higher spend. And that's why we're excited. You know, I think we now have 25 million people in the rewards program. We're going to continue to stay aggressive on the acquisition, but it's also, how do you keep those people active? And, you know, that's why we did things like this new rewards program where, you know, when we first started this, you could only accrue points to get a free burrito or a free entree. Now we've done things where, you know, you can use your points to get flip-flops that say, you know, guac on it to chips and salsa. So the thing that's great about that is, for like the light user that comes into it, they feel like there's a reward that they can obtain. And what happens is, it's kind of an interesting behavioral phenomenon. They actually end up accruing more points because they come more often, but because they think there's lower thresholds, they feel like they don't have to come as often to get a reward. So, the guys do a great job.
Hmm.
And obviously people love the idea of having some sort of program where they could ultimately get benefits with Chipotle beyond just an ordinary transaction.
Mhm. So I have a menu question that will lead me into the next one. Menu question is, when will the smoked brisket be back on the regular menu?
I'll tell you what, as soon as possible. When you asked that question, I was like, if you would have asked me that back in November, I would have said my favorite thing to get is a brisket quesadilla. But now that we don't have brisket anymore, I had to switch. But look, this is one of the things of having a supply chain that we hold ourselves accountable to doing certain practices with animal welfare. We'll only take certain cuts. And, the good news was the demand was really terrific. The bad news was we didn't have the ability to source more in the time frame that we were doing it. So we'll bring it back, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I'm glad whoever asked it liked it. It's I love it. The sauce. I don't know what was better, the sauce or the meat. I mean, I like both a whole lot, so it was good.
So the follow-on is you're launching more and more plant-based, you're the plant-based chorizo and other things. So broader question, which we'll get to, but before that, what does the process of new product development and sort of an introduction look like? And then we'll get into the whole, how much you're going to invest in this over time.
Yeah, sure. So we do so one of the things that I introduced to the company was just a stage gate process where, look, I always want to be a place where our employees believe ideas can be brought forward and we'll give them, visibility. And then I also want all of our external partners or anybody to know, like, look, if you got a great idea that you think makes sense for Chipotle, you should be calling this up because we'll give it a shot. Okay. And so that's where the stage gate process comes in. It's really a process that says, hey, is the idea make sense conceptually? And, does it pencil out? And if that's the case, then we take it to a prototype phase or a pilot phase. And then if that shows some hope, we put it into a restaurant or two. If that performs, then we move it into usually a patch, which is like 7 or 8. And then from there, you go into a region, which could be as many as 40 to 100 restaurants. And then we'll do multiple regions. And the reason why we have to do that is, look, when you're running a system of 3,000 restaurants with 100,000 people, it's easy to make it work in one restaurant. It's very different when it's working in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's working in Sacramento, and it's also working down in Atlanta. And you're doing it at the same time. You've trained people and you've watched how they behave for the next 3 months. And so that's the process that we have. And, we kind of have basically some key metrics that we need to get to green in order for us to say, let's go. And, there's no magic to this. It's like, is it good for the consumer? Can we operationally execute it? Does it make financial sense? And is it consistent with our brand and mission? If you can answer those things, then we've got a shot at bringing this forward.
Okay. So broader question is, do you think that plant-based foods are here to stay?
I do. Yeah, I do. It's definitely it's becoming more and more a part of people's diets. Not everybody's becoming a vegan by any means, but it's definitely people, I think, it used to be you would switch between chicken and steak, and then you had a few people that would go between chicken, steak, and seafood. Now you got people bouncing between plant-based, chicken, steak, and seafood. And it's part of their, I would say, regimen and the variety that people like. So, we were kind of the first ones to be doing the organic tofu, which is our sofritas product, which is terrific. And, we've experimented and we've had some success in tests with like the cauliflower rice and then most recently the plant-based chorizo.
Have you changed Chipotle's approach to social responsibility and environmental issues since you started? And sort of generally your feelings about ESG?
Yeah, look, I would just say, I think we've doubled down on it. It's one of those things that it's been at the core of Chipotle from the beginning. We were much more centered on it from a standpoint of doing the right thing at the farm, because we believed if we did the right thing at the farm, you end up with, just more delicious food at the table. And, Steve Ells, our founder, he proved this out right away. He could taste the difference between, pork that was allowed, to have free range and versus pork that was done the conventional way. And I think you can taste it in all the food. I get this question a lot because people are like, well, can customers really, would they be able to tell the difference? And I'm like, you know what? I know the difference. And I feel much better about the food we serve because I know the way in which it's been raised. And so we've committed heavily to that. I would say, over the last couple of years, we've gotten even more aggressive on climate. And the company's had a history of even experimenting with that. There's a restaurant, I'm trying to remember where it was. It was somewhere in Indiana. We stuck a windmill on the roof to see if we could use wind energy to, power the restaurant. Now that didn't work, but I only use that as an example of saying this is something that's been in the DNA of the company for a long time. And, now we're much more public about it. And, we're trying to figure out how we can make an even more positive impact. And we really boil it down to, food, people, planet. And those are the three things that we're constantly trying to figure out how we can invest in.
I'm going to ask you one more food question and then a couple of strategy questions. Are we ever going to get the chocolate shakes you tested a few years ago?
Well, they are delicious, but there's no plans to bring those out anytime soon. Sorry to say.
We had a few people ask about how do you prompt users to sort of use more of your own apps as opposed to going to, the third party or other platforms like Grubhub and others? And how do you generally sort of, think about that ecosystem, if you will?
Yeah, look, we're pretty fortunate with the level of brand affinity that we have, because people come to our app when they've already made the decision they're ordering Chipotle, right? They go to a marketplace app when they're like, hey, I need something to eat. And, our job is frankly, how do we make sure more people are saying, hey, I'm hungry, I want Chipotle. And when that occurs, they end up in our app. And then obviously our guys are doing more marketing work and so on and so forth. But, look, I think the marketplaces or the called third-party apps, there's no reason why we shouldn't participate in those. We have to do it in a way where it makes financial sense, both for them and us. And, if you use that, you'll see the prices are higher when you go through a third-party app. And that's the nature of the beast. And when I talk to, some of the guys that run those companies, they would prefer our prices to be lower. And I'd say, well, I'd prefer your cost to be lower. So if, but I totally get it. There's a model for them to make financial sense. And in that model, this is what we have to charge the customer for it to make financial sense if you want that access. So, it's priced accordingly. But at the end of the day, the best thing we can do at our company is make sure people love Chipotle first and foremost. If they have more affinity for our brand, they'll be looking for our brand. And, that's our job.
Question going back to the ESG about single-use plastic and takeout containers drives me crazy. Is there any innovation in this space?
There is a lot of innovation in the space, and it is something that we're always trying to figure out. And we're actually looking at, silverware that's more compostable, straws that are more compostable, lids that are more compostable. The challenge you have is the faster they break down, the faster they break down. So, it's this balancing act, but it's something we're constantly seeking to see if we can be better at with solutions. And we're not afraid to invest in it. We have a great program where we take all those gloves that you see our crew using, and instead of us just throwing it away, we recycle them into the trash bags that we use. And it's those types of things where, as a result, I probably have the most expensive trash bags in the restaurant industry, but look, it's the right thing to do. So, and I think not many people probably know it. And people would say to me, well, gee, people don't know that. Why don't you tell them that? And I'm like, look, there is something to be said for, I just feel good about eating at Chipotle, and they can feel good knowing that we're trying in every possible way to do our part. And, I think that makes people feel great about being a part of your brand or your company.
So how do you find the balance between being okay with where you are today as a business, Brian, versus wanting more growth? Sort of, how do you balance those two?
Well, we're not happy with where we are today. We definitely want to grow. We're delighted with the results, but look, this company should be in very short order, double the restaurant count. We've been public about that, and we've also been public about the idea that we can get our average unit sales to be well beyond $3 million. So when I started, we were at like 1.9, and now we're at 2.5, 2.6. And so we think we can grow organically within the four walls, and we think we can grow by building more restaurants. And look, the economics support building more restaurants. We get close to a 70% return on capital, and there are plenty of sites. If we could build them faster, we would. And the reason we don't build them faster is because you got to make sure you got people prepared to run those restaurants. The good news for us is the bigger we get, the more employees we have that are ready to be trained to go run more restaurants. So, when we were only a 2,000 restaurant chain, it was harder to build 300 restaurants a year. But now when we're a 3,000 restaurant chain, it makes it a little bit easier to build 300 restaurants a year because I've got more people that I'm developing. So, look, people growth, huge priority, because the people growth sets up our, call it financial growth. And the good news is there really is, I don't see things that would get in the way of us accomplishing our growth goals, short of not being able to staff restaurants. But, I think we're managing that aggressively, and we won't let that be a barrier.
And when you think about growth, how much of it is in the US versus international? We had a question about, has it been different in Europe, just given their difference in awareness and perception, and how has that played out for you?
Yeah, so we are early days in Canada and Europe, and I'm happy to say we've had tremendous success in Canada. We've been public about this too. The economics now in Canada match the US, and frankly, in some cases are better. Now they only have 25 restaurants up there, or 30 restaurants up there, but we think we could have 300, 400 of them, and we're going to get after it. Europe, COVID has really slowed us down there. We were experimenting with some new design, both in the restaurant physical as well as locations. And the good news is now we finally have those open, and we're seeing some really promising results. But it's early days. We're in the UK and France and Germany. We've invested more time into the UK and France right now. But we put in our digital system. We've put in a lot of the learnings that we have on the operating model. And the good news is it wasn't that long ago where we only had 20 restaurants in the United States. So we understand the adoption curve for the consumer. Look, social media and digital is very global. So people are more aware than they would have been 20 years ago when we first started Chipotle. So we think we've got a lot of opportunity outside the US as well.
The other question that came up, we had a question in advance about when is Chipotle going to come to India? A question here about when will you be bringing Chipotle to Asia more broadly? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it's part of our roadmap, and we just need to figure out how we go about doing it and finding the right partners in some of those regions that you mentioned versus doing it on our own in other regions. But, look, I think we have a global idea. It's great culinary, great value, high customization, and fast. Well, and if you really stop and think about it, we sell chicken and rice, chicken, rice, and beans. That's in 65% of our orders. Those are all global foods. There's nothing that doesn't say that doesn't work in India, and Middle East. You pick the part of the world. Chicken's kind of the global protein, and rice and beans go really well with it. So, I'm very bullish on the idea of taking what I think is a restaurant company that's got, you guys would. I remember doing these case studies in strategy class, right? It was like value, quality, speed, customization, pick one, maybe two. We've got all four. So it's like, why wouldn't this work? Right. So I'm pretty optimistic.
Question about diversity and inclusion issues. How have they come up at Chipotle? What approaches are you using to think about that?
Yeah, look, this is one of the things that's great about our growth story is, our growth in our people are going to come from our restaurants, and our restaurants are very diverse. They reflect the communities that we operate in. So, not surprising, you'll see higher minority groups in certain parts of the region than other parts of the region. And what we've really been focused on is let's make sure we get those people to promote up. So we have a goal to promote from within, to move people from the restaurant to these above store jobs. So like when I talk about a field leader overseeing 7 or 8 restaurants, or a team director overseeing 40, I would like the team director in the Southeast to come out of the Southeast. And if we do that correctly, we will get the diversity that we already have in the restaurant in these management levels throughout the restaurant or throughout the company. So that's our priority. One of the things we also make sure is everybody gets paid correctly. You know, we don't want to see pay not being equitable. You know, everybody should be getting paid for the role that they're doing. And, you know, it doesn't matter skin color or heritage or, you know, sex. So we take a lot of pride in making sure that compensation is equitable and that we're promoting people from within. And we know if we keep doing that, we'll maintain the great diversity that we have.
You mentioned about the classes you took at Booth. So we had many questions asking about sort of what do you remember about your time at Booth, and what did you learn that's helped you in your career?
Yeah, well, you know, look, I loved my time at Booth. There are some of those moments that you just remember all the time. It was a class, it was with Professor Kaplan. You know, I came in and he had up, I don't know if he still does this, I haven't talked to him in a while, but he put up on the whiteboard, you know, CIS, it stood for cash flow is more important than your mother. And like, it was one of those things where I was like, geez, you know, that seems a little aggressive. But, you know, as I've worked in the restaurant business, you know, that probably couldn't be more true of a statement. You know, and, you know, look, I just loved my time there, both with the professors and my peers, because it was a lot of fun debating whatever the topic was, you know, whether it was an accounting class or a strategy class, or, you know, I remember the theories of leadership class with Dr. Zonas. I know he's passed, but, you know, those were just great classes. And the thing I loved about it is when you left the class, the discussion went on, you know, and that's what I thought was one of the highlights of my experience.
And for students who are currently at school thinking about, you know, getting into going out, you know, in the next year or two, sort of what are attributes you think that they should focus on, right? Like what are things that have helped you in your own leadership journey, and what do you think that they should be focusing on?
Yeah, look, I think you got to be willing to take the job that other people aren't willing to take, you know, and you know, I also think you can't be afraid to share your idea. And, you know, it's like you may be the newest person in the room, but you can't be afraid to share your idea. I also think you got to take the time to learn. Okay. You know, if some people would be ambitious in learning as they are ambitious in saying what they should have, they'd be amazed at how effective and quickly they would move. You know, and I just think it serves people really well to really make sure that they're taking the time to learn and listen, as well as, you know, not be afraid to step into the jobs that maybe others would say, I don't want to do that. And, you know, sometimes you get surprised at what you learn in that role, who you meet in that role, and where it takes you next. And I think people have to be comfortable with the idea that your career, you may have it planned out on what you think are the right things to do. But sometimes the ones where you zig end up being the ones that are the most rewarding and end up putting you in places that you would have never thought. You know, my first job was at Procter & Gamble working on Scope mouthwash. And, you know, I was going to cure bad breath around the world. And, you know, you quickly found yourself working on Pringles, and then, you know, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and here I am at Chipotle. So, you know, it's, yeah, I think take the time to learn. I'd say be as aggressive in learning as people are as aggressive in saying what they think they should be doing. And you'd be amazed what would happen.
How would you characterize your own leadership style?
You know, you should ask the folks that work with me, but you know, the way I like to describe it is I like to keep things simple, and I like to be focused, and then I'm totally fine with being unorthodox in the things that we're focused on and solving. but it's an exponential factor of performance and outcomes when you're very focused on what you're going to do. Look, the digital business, we said we wanted to have $1 billion business over the next 5 years. And here we are in year 3, and it's already over 3 billion. Now, we had some macro factors help us, but you want to know something? If we weren't laser focused on getting that digital system put into the restaurant, we would not be where we are today. We would not have gotten it done in 12 months, right? And, look, when I got here, the company was not short on ideas. The company was short on execution. Okay. And so and people will tell you, I hold them accountable to, like, let's make sure we achieve what we say we're going to achieve. And if we don't, there better be a learning in there for us to understand why. And, maybe the answer is we made the wrong choice, or maybe the answer is we didn't execute something correctly. But, I boil it down to, like, picking and, strategy is really that, right? It's like, pick your lane, allocate the resources. Don't be afraid to learn on your way. If you found out you made a wrong choice, fix it. And then, let's hold each other accountable. So the other thing I try to spend a lot of time on too is we collectively as a team are accountable for these things. It's not one person's agenda versus another person's agenda. We're after this for the betterment of the company and for all of our employees. I think as you get into these roles, you have a lot of responsibility to make sure that what you're doing is performing for everybody. And, I want everybody to succeed.
Question about what trade-offs you had to make to become a CEO in terms of sort of work-life balance, social life, hobbies, health, things like that. I think students would love to know how you think about that sort of more holistically.
Yeah. Look, I'm pretty fortunate. My wife, Jennifer, and I, we've been married for 20 years. And, I still work on the work-life balance. I don't think there's a secret, to making it all just click. But, the one thing that I've tried to do, and, I still could be better at it is, if you say yes to something, whether it's a work commitment or a family commitment, then you deliver on it. And I made the mistake earlier in my career where it's like, well, I'll try to be there. Well, when you say that, all you're setting yourself up for is disappointment, because you'll be disappointed if you don't make it. The people you said you're going to try and be there for, take that as you're going to be there. You disappoint them. And then usually what happens is you show up 20 minutes late. And it's like, well, that stinks for everybody. So, that's one of the things I work on really hard. And Jen and I usually on Sundays look at the calendar for the next week or two and try to figure out where all the yeses and nos are, and then adjust on the fly, because as much as our game plan we think is going to work starting on Sunday, it all changes on Monday. So, you got to have, I guess, the communication is probably the most important thing. And, we've always talked about what Jen knew what my ambitions were. And, at the same token, I still wanted to be a great husband and a great dad. So it's like, I needed her to give me the feedback when I wasn't doing that.
And what are things you like to do in your own time, like hobbies, volunteering? So what are your interests?
Yeah, sure. So we do some, personally, I enjoy golf and photography. I'd like to get outside and do both of those things. And then as a family, we like to ski as a family and also travel as a family. So that's a big hobby for us. And then Jen and I, we like eating out. So we're kind of foodies and trying to always experiment with restaurants around the world. And then, another thing we enjoy doing is we give back in various organizations. I think it's important for our kids to see that and for them to grow up with that. We're in a pretty grateful, blessed situation, and I think it's just as important to give back as you're on your way. So we try to do that in our community, and hopefully we're making a difference.
So you mentioned P&G and scope, and of course P&G has this sort of great reputation for training people to become great managers, brand managers. What was your experience like, and what did you take away from that?
Yeah, look, I had a great experience at Procter & Gamble. I was very fortunate to have great managers. My first brand manager was Craig Capozzo, and he was a brand manager on scope. I was one of the assistant brand managers. And, you know, the thing that I learned quickly at P&G was how to build a case for what I believed was the right thing to do. And, you know, I was always comfortable with the analytics, but they helped me take the analytics and turn it into insight, and then turn that insight into action. And it was a valuable thing to learn early in my career. The other thing that was a huge priority is, you know, you develop others. And, you know, it wasn't enough for you to succeed. You had to make sure that others could succeed with your leadership. And, you know, those were invaluable lessons. And I had just some great folks that, you know, I got to work for. And, you know, I'm confident I probably would not have been able to achieve as much as I did early in my career if I didn't have those people to, you know, invest in me and give me the feedback and help me figure out how to, okay, this is how you work a formal network. This is how you work an informal network. This is how you, you know, bring forward an idea. You know, I remember, so this will date me, but when I was at Scope, you know, we had this idea to do an email marketing campaign, and the idea was to send a kiss via email, and like all different kinds of kisses, right? Like the big lips, the tiny lips, and you know, it was a big deal because, you know, everybody had dial-up, so it was like, how much red could you really put into these lips? Okay. But you know, I didn't have internet access, and I had to go to our division president to ask for $10,000 in internet access. And, you know, I was like, oh my God, how's this going to work? And, you know, luckily my boss at the time, Craig, was like, you know, show me what you got. And I put it together, and next thing you know, I'm in Bruce Burns' office, and I'm asking for 10 grand in internet access. And we ended up building a really cool campaign and got recognized. And, you know, now people would, if I showed it to you, you'd be like, that was your idea. But, you know, for the time, it was one of those that were kind of unorthodox, especially at P&G at the time.
Mm-hmm. And again, thinking about things you do outside, I know you're on the board of KB Home, right? And before that, you were on the board of Harley Davidson. So how do you think about these outside opportunities? Like, which ones do you must get a lot of them. How do you decide which ones to pick, and how much do you sort of invest in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, personally, I'm just interested right now in housing, because I think as a country, it's a challenge. And so I wanted to learn more about it. And, you know, they were interested in some of my background with my experiences with consumer facing businesses. So it was a good marriage, because it was one of those things where it's like, look, I'm really interested in trying to figure out how we can solve the housing gap that we have in the United States. And I figured, you know, well, probably a good place to be is at a home builder to understand how this all works. So that's why I was really interested in it. You know, Harley Davidson was just a great brand. It was my first board opportunity. And in both cases, the people that are on the board are great. You know, the board dinner, in my mind, is almost as valuable for me than anything else, because the topics that get discussed, people's experiences in their company versus your company, their industry, there's just so much richness in that. And it's kind of my way of recreating probably a class at the University of Chicago, is, you know, by having that dinner. So, so that's part of the reason why I continue to do it. But, you know, a time and a place, it always, every once in a while, you're like, oh, you know, that makes sense. I'd be interested in doing that.
So we're sort of almost out of time. I had to ask you this one question that somebody wrote: would you offer special discounts to Booth students?
Join the rewards program.
Brian, we're out of time. I want to thank you for taking the time to first be here. I know you're very busy, but also for being so open and candid and answering so many questions on so many different topics. I think this was fascinating. I learned a lot. I'm sure our students and alumni learned a lot as well. So we're just incredibly proud of what you've achieved as a Booth alum, and congratulations to you, and more success going forward. Thank you again, Brian.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was great being with you, and good luck to everybody, and all the best.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.